In this talk, I'm going to talk about the collaboration hurdles in high-tech product development and some of the latest innovations that Keysight and Microsoft have brought together to help with that process. So first, before we get into the details, a couple points about the use cases. So when we think about collaboration, right, it takes many shapes and forms. On the left, it's all-up engineering design, but when you think about the design process, all the steps along the way, you have the debugging issues either with your IP provider or your EDA vendor, to joint design activities, maybe it's design services, or it's another company you're working on a design together with. And of course, then all the way to the right, throughout that process, the secure aspect of how to exchange data, keep it safe, and make sure only those who need to know have access to it. So just keep these broad set of use cases in mind as we walk through the other slides. So across these use cases, typically there's about 3 common challenges that arise. So the first would be in terms of a management system and processes. Across the groups, you want to ensure, of course, there's no miscommunication, whether it's design specs, whether it's which test benches do I use, do I have access to certain types of data and nothing more. So that in and of itself is very often cumbersome and hard to set up right. The second would be, okay, well, what about the actual real-time data exchange? So anything from IP repositories that are central or distributed to the outputs of different workflows, a simulation result. How does it come back to me, my colleagues, my collaborators? And in today's world where teams are geographically distributed, not just within the US, but across the world, this is of paramount importance too, and performance becomes a very critical part of that. And the third too here, and this kind of piggybacking on number 2, when teams are truly collaborating in real time, geographically distributed, we need instant access to IP. You're doing check-ins, check-outs. It's got to be instant. It's got to be performant. And it has to scale. So we have to have underlying infrastructures that can scale to meet the needs of the largest projects. So in this next slide, I'm going to take you through a specific use case that I think will tease out more specifically these challenges. So take, for example, very commonly you have 3 organizations working together. So 1, 2, 3, these boxes will represent, as I step through the slide, the different pieces that are in their domain of control and where collaboration crosses boundaries. So of course, the designers, starting out with their PDKs, they each typically get that on their own. And they're doing some custom design work, but at a certain point, they're going to do some blocks or integration with other companies. And then just this case, digital design, for example. Right, so now we have to start connecting across the enterprises and connecting our workflows and managing IP sharing. So then let's say these teams are also doing some RF design. They each are going to have to test and validate, but at a certain point you have to get into system integration, whether that's at a chip level, package level, board level. And that's where sharing the documentation and having it streamlined, version control, data control, now that becomes difficult across organizational boundaries or enterprise boundaries. So then what's left to further complicate this is company number 1 might have their IT InfoSec requirements and their compliance requirements. And number 2, they'll need their own, and they're not necessarily aligned. So you're in the situation where you need to connect and interact, but the processes in place today are inherently blocking that collaboration. So at the end of the day, we've got this challenge where, well, what's the right balance? How do we enable the companies to be agile, use their typical flows, do what they need to do, but at the same time, quickly and seamlessly share data, applications, and workflows, right? And do so in a real-time sense. So we've got to get away, industries needs to get away from this decades-old way of operating where collaboration is tarring up test cases and FTPing them or emailing to people, right? That's not real-time collaboration. And it's inundated with problems and mistakes. So, so the question is, so what is needed to enable this? So the first is streamlined IP and data and design data management. So many times at the core of what's being collaborated on is the IP and design data itself, which we want to have a single source of truth, right? Multiple copies, we want to be able to do that. But we want to do it in a way that can cut across the organizational boundaries, that can scale and be performant. So, and it also has to support multiple workflows, right? So as the team was just pointing out a minute ago, many design EDA tools are used in these complex workflows. So it has to be agile, an approach has to be agile enough to support the different needs of different design groups, RF, analog, mixed signal, digital, and bring that all together at the end of the day. And then also from a deployment and IT management framework, this also has to be easily deployed, be able to bring on new collaborators on demand, and support integration of their workflows into that process. So this is just what's needed. In the next few slides, we'll talk about, well, what are some of the solutions coming to bear? Some from Keysight, some from Microsoft, and how those work together. So part of the solution is, well, the data management needs to be distributed and at scale. These are a little hard to see, but it's essentially showing a migration from a central IP type model to distributed. So the sense of how can we leverage the Keysight SOS cache technology so that users around the world with large data sets can quickly access the data in the management system. So check-in, check-outs that happen instantaneously rather than having huge latencies back to some other continent to retrieve the data. So the SOS cache is instrumental in that. What it also does in terms of your data footprint, it's gone a long way to drastically reduce the data usage there, 90, 95%. They've seen this over and over in different use cases as well as on Azure itself. So part of how a user is going to leverage this too is that they've got to have the underlying infrastructure that can support it. So when you're talking about these models, right, if you're trying to collaborate with enterprises who have completely different infrastructures, all with their own different limitations, it becomes hard to have this ubiquitous solution that can support all your teaming arrangements. So here we've teamed with Keysight to demonstrate how using this new Azure modeling and simulation workbench, which is a new platform as a service that launched earlier this year, you now can on-demand deploy essentially a data center in a box or in a chamber for all your collaborators, and then now you have a common infrastructure for each of these teams for which this distributed repository can be deployed to. So let me double-click into the Workbench for a moment. So the Workbench is this super automated way of deploying a secure development platform in the cloud. So on demand, being able to get into the cloud, all the complexities of how to build out cloud are abstracted away. So essentially you have no need to know cloud and just get in there, deploy this entire environment in about an hour, and then it does all the preparation for the users. So OS installed, so your VMs come ready to use with the Keysight tools, and you can expand so that the workloads are the right size for your simulations. So if you have a collaborator who, say, is doing a small block IP verification, and they just need a limited infrastructure, but you want them in that distributed data repository umbrella, you can deploy this and right-size it to them. If you have another co-design services partner who's doing large-scale RF simulation, then they're going to need more storage, more VMs, and with the Workbench, again, with clicks of a button, you can get that. So at the end of the day, you're right-sizing the infrastructure for these collaboration configurations. And then underpinning the Workbench really are four key principles, actually 5. I talked about the scalability and performance, so leveraging the fastest VMs, so being able to get faster turnaround times on your simulation jobs compared to your on-prem infra. And of course, not being limited by the amount of compute or storage you have on-prem. I spoke about the automation, of course, and the collaboration with the built-in security too. So the last thing you want to do is say, go perhaps to a GitHub type code and have everyone deploy an insecure cloud infrastructure. So with this Workbench solution, you have lots of under the hood security monitoring, patching, and vulnerability checking, always running constantly. The fifth principle, which I don't have on this slide here, is AI too. So now we heard about some great AI capabilities from the Keysight. Today, if you want to leverage AI capabilities, more and more you're going to need infrastructure that can support it. So as you want to run larger workloads in your AI optimization, this provides an easy way to access that. So far, I talked about the data repository distribution, the Workbench infrastructure. So these are all components of what's needed for that collaboration model. But at the end of the day, you need a glue to pull it all together. And that's where the Keysight HUB, we've seen just do an amazing job in this sense. So if you're not familiar with HUB, please get all the details from the team here. But at a high level, you think about it's not just IP, it's not just the test benches, but it's where is it being used, who is it used by, what are the workflows that they're ingested into, and actually the bottom left, even getting into things like, well, tagging IP, whether there's any export controls. So at the end of the day, HUB has some amazing ways to integrate all these pieces. So that's why I think of HUB as the glue. And with HUB, you can now go from sort of old school way of maintaining scripts and launching job runs to actually having a fully automated end-to-end workflow. So HUB can work off, has triggers where upon certain actions, I can launch a simulation, take the results, bring that back in a documented way. And HUB is compatible with all the major EDA tools out there. So now you can really start to think of this is not just a point solution for, say, data version control, but a complete end-to-end product development lifecycle management solution. So in summary, we really touched on 3 key points. One is the new modeling and simulation workbench, which if you'd like to learn more, we're right upstairs. But we've used that in conjunction with the Keysight tools and had some pretty cool results with that. So happy to discuss that more offline. The second, again, part of what's needed for this forward-thinking way of doing advanced product development is to leverage SOS and HUB, but do so in the context of a true end-to-end lifecycle management, because that's where, at the end of the day, you're going to get the most efficiencies is by having that seamless integration across all the workflows and the IP that go with it.